Today I'm going to show you how I made this fantastic faux terracotta candle holder out of an old outdated ceramic piece that I found.
Have you ever had something that you found you thought was so perfect, but yet had no idea what to do with it for years? Well, okay, maybe not years, but I've had this huge candlestick for well over a year. I knew I wanted to refinish it. I wasn't sure how I wanted it done or where I was going to put it, but I absolutely loved the shape and I knew I wanted something done with this. So I finally figured it out. I'm going to make this look like faux aged terracotta. To kind of go, we have kind of a modern country farmhouse thing going on, so I think it'll look just perfect in our space. So let's go ahead and I'll show you what I've been thinking. So here is a couple different ways I have come up with adding some texture to my terracotta paint. Now I don't know if you can see, this one is really pretty rough. What this stuff was, we had some of this Rolotex texture additive for paint hanging out in the garage, so I decided to try that, and it really came out very bumpy and coarse, which I'll figure out. I'll find something to do with it. But this right here came out looking a lot like terracotta in the end. Those little rough patches just kind of rub right off, and this is simply baking soda and paint. So this is what I'm going to do to give this its initial terracotta base coat. But before I do that, I want to rough up this glazed part up here, just so the paint has something to stick to. I'm just using some 80 grit sandpaper and just a little bit, just scratch it up a bit. Anyway, we're all done with this piece, and now it's time to mix up the paint. Being a big piece, it's going to take quite a bit of paint here, so I'm just going to mix up this. I got Anita's terracotta paint, and I ended up buying 3 of these tubes just in case. And I'm just going to pour some baking soda in there, and we're going to get this stirred up and see how it's looking, if it has that texture I want. If I need to add a little bit more baking soda to the mix. And I can tell you right now it looks pretty paint-like still. So I'm going to add a little bit more baking soda. Okay, here we go. I'm just going to start adding and mixing until I have it. It's going to be a little bit thick together. And I know it looks like a lot of baking soda, but you want enough that you can add that texture. Okay, now there you go. You can see it's fairly thick and gloppy. So I guess to tell you, that's what you're looking for. Kind of a gloppy texture, yeah. It's more about the thickness of yogurt, I think, would be a good comparison right now. And I'm just going to go ahead and start with the top here. Alright, now I did want to show you, I started sanding this down. For some reason my camera didn't turn on when I started. Here is how it looked. A little bit rough before. I think I added a little bit too much baking soda, but that's okay. I mean, the look is still kind of cool. It just looks like old pottery. And here is where I started sanding it down, and it kind of has that aged terracotta look to it that I was looking for anyway with just a good sanding. So I'm going to continue sanding this down, and again I'm just using my 80 grit sandpaper.
Now that I have my candlestick all sanded down, I'm going to take a damp cloth and I'm going to wipe the rest of the dust off of the candlestick since I did a lot of sanding and there's quite a bit of dust there. Now, as I'm sanding along, you can see a couple shiny places where I sanded down to the original finish. That's okay. In the end, you are not even going to notice those. They're going to be completely camouflaged by the aging techniques I used to finish the candlestick.
All right, now that my terracotta is painted on, dried, I sanded it down and let that dry completely. Again, I'm ready to move on to the next step, and that is going to be layering and applying some aging effects. And what I'm using is my Waverly chalk paint and moss, my antiquing wax, which is a folk art, as well as my white wax, which is also folk art. And this is just going to help it look like it's been setting outside in the weather for years. Has some of the moss, the dirt, and the whitening with age that comes with it. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to use my moss chalk paint. And I'm just going to use a towel here, and I use shop towels a lot in my craft room. They just have less fuzz on them than you tend to get from paper towels, and they hold up better. But I'm just going to, out of the lid, take some of the moss paint, and I'm just going to start dabbing it around in different areas. So we kind of have that look of just some moss growing in certain areas. I'm going to go on with the black wax, or the antiquing wax, and I am just going to go in a little bit and add some dirt where maybe it would be present. Then I'm going to go in and wipe it off. I want to kind of subdue it a little bit. And I'm using the white wax here. And we're going to start down here, and we are just going to start rubbing on this antiquing wax. And then I'm going to come back through and just wipe it off.
I felt that the shop towels were not giving me enough texture for the moss look, so I switched over to a sea sponge that I had, and I'm wetting it down and going back over some of the mossy paint with the sea sponge. And you can see here just how much texture that is giving the piece.
Okay, honestly, I think this is coming along really well since I switched to my sea sponge. I added a little bit of the sponged moss over the dirty areas, and that helps it look a lot more natural. But I want to add another color of green, so I pulled out, it's an Americana multi-surface satin. It's just what I had on hand. There's no particular reason for this. I do like that it's a satin though, so it's not going to have that glossy look next to the chalk paint. It's green beret, and I am just going to squirt a little bit of that out, use my sea sponge, go ahead and get this wet again, and I'm going to sponge just a little bit of this over some of the existing green. I'm going to go in with my white wax again. I'm just going to clean this green paint off of here. And then I'm going to go in with my white wax. And I'm going to use this to tone down that darker green a little bit. Whoa. Grab a new piece of paper towel and just dab that. Tone that down. Alright, now just to continue layering to get that look of hopefully more real moss than we have going now, I am going to go back in with my antiquing wax and make sure I have a fairly wet sponge doing this because I want it to be light and watery looking. Don't want it to go on too dark. Okay, I'm just going to lightly dab over those areas. Bring that back off. Sorry, I guess I wasn't quite in the camera there. Okay, and you can see as I keep layering this, it's giving it a lot more of an aged look. So I'm just going to keep working with this, going back and forth between the colors until we have a finished aged pot here.
Now, back in the beginning when I was sanding, I made the decision to save the paint that I'd sanded off, and I had poured it into this Dixie cup. What I'm going to do now to add the finishing touch to this candlestick is to use a very wet sea sponge, and I am going to sponge this powder back over the finished candlestick, and that'll add another layer of texture and dimension, and it will also add back in some very small flecks of terracotta that will be showing through the moss and the dirt. This will help give it a more realistic effect as well because we'll add those minute bits of texture back into the candlestick that we've lost with the layers of paint. Here is the finished candle holder. Once it was completed and dried, I took it outside. I sprayed it with 2 layers of matte sealer, and it was ready to set out, and it looks just perfect in our home. Let me know what you think. Give me a thumbs up if you like this video, and I will see you soon for the next project. Bye-bye.